Well, good evening, everybody. Hopefully you can hear us all right.
Hello there.
Yeah,
Hey,
hopefully
Mike Faust.
And Norma. And anybody else who's tuned in, let us know by leaving us a comment. That's literally the only way that we can even know that people are watching, because my view counter is wildly inaccurate and untrustworthy. So leaving comments is the best way to go.
It's those Russian bots, right, that throw things off.
I would love a Russian bot or two. I'm not that popular enough to get the trolls and the bots. But welcome to the Nate Show once again with Jeff Eaton, back by popular demand. We've got some fun, and I think I posted about interesting, or I don't remember what, unique. Love poems. Because I feel like a lot of people, when they hear love poems, are like, okay, roses are red, but they don't know Jeff Eaton.
Or my late wife.
Or your wife, Mary. They were both very eclectic and delightful people. So those drinks look fancy, Norma says.
They taste fancy too, Norma.
Do you remember what's in it?
Well, it's decaf, but it's like roast ground
all
decaf.
Fresh in the house.
None will be replenished during the show due to the sound issues.
Yeah, the coffee grinder is very loud, so we had to get all of our drinks in. Drink orders in.
Bailey's?
Yes.
So Bailey's Irish cream,
Rum.
coffee, and rum.
And a little bit of
steamed milk.
So if my daughter in New Orleans is watching, it's right up your alley, Eleanor.
And this is only here to make those of you who decided not to join us in person feel jealous. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
In this room, actually.
Everyone in the room. So we actually have a small audience with us. I'm not going to bother showing you the audience tonight just because it takes.
Because they're small.
Well, because they're small and it takes a little extra work. But we've got Josh and Olivia and Andrea sitting here drinking their own versions of these as well. So we're all enjoying it, the cat included. I'm just kidding. I don't know if the cat's. And there's cookies too. So all that to say.
That's why I come, is for the cookies.
Yes. If you want to come to our live shows, we actually have in-person audiences for just about every one of these shows. If you're not familiar with the Nate Show, I'm Nate, and this is my show. And basically, it's just a fun little thing that I started a couple of years ago, just to kind of beat the winter blues. And then it kind of grew into this, where I now have guests on. I like to think of myself as the Northwood's first late-night talk show.
It starts at 8:30.
It starts at 8:30 every other Tuesday.
That's parent late.
Huh?
That's parent late.
Parent late, yes. So it started out of necessity because we have kids, and I'm in my house. If you didn't figure that out, I am getting a comment
that way.
that the sound is maybe a bit low, so I will bump that just a little bit. Try not to blow your ears out here. So let me just adjust a little bit. Hold on a second. Pardon the mess. Hopefully that's a little better. Let me know if that sounds a little bit better. And there's also a Mary Fleet White who is tuning in.
Yes. Smudge from Madison.
I'll assume that means something.
Mary's assistant at the magazine, and our best friend down in Madison, and mother of my goddaughter. So.
Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. Also, Ellie Jet says, cheers from Crescent City.
That's Picolinto, my daughter in New Orleans.
There you go. We've got a lively, supportive audience of Jeff here, so that's wonderful. So anyway, the Nate Show. If you want to learn more about it, nateshepard.com/The Nate Show, or I don't know, message me. I guess ask Jeff. It's a pretty underground, and by underground I mean like 10 people tune in on a weekly basis. So. And we like it that way. And that's the other thing, is that the show is not available for watching after the fact, which.
Nope,
is
ephemeral.
Very strange. Yeah, but I like tapping into that sort of, we're here, even if we're online, we're here for this moment to enjoy this wonderful poetry that Jeff has brought for us. I don't know if there's any other housekeeping things. I know I said I was.
Did you mention
I need to start promoting my stuff.
Yeah.
I always forget that I have like things that I can promote. So I know that I do sometimes get flack for the fact that the Nate Show is not available for replay. So if, for whatever reason, you think that things that I say are interesting enough, I do actually now have a podcast. And there's a little part of me that just died saying that I have a podcast, because it's just everybody has a podcast. I get it. But my friend Houston Coley and I started a podcast. We're both filmmakers who are also interested in philosophy, theology, art, etc. So if you're interested in that podcast, we've had 5, technically 6 episodes now. Our last one was on gift economy. and the sort of value of generosity as artists. We talk about capitalism. So, what's not to like? Two white guys talking about capitalism. So if you're interested in tuning into that, we talk about other things too. Art Within it's the Art Within podcast. So artwithin.substack.com is the place to go for that. And I also have a TED Talk out now, a TEDx Talk, which is something I did at the local college here, and I will be posting about that tomorrow because it just came out today. But it's on the TEDx channel, so that'll be fun too. I don't know why I'm promoting myself. It's a talk show. Somebody's got to promote something. So unless you have,
you don't have like a new album cover to put up or anything.
I've got albums back here, and I would love to actually eventually produce a music album that's on vinyl, just so I can show it on the Nate Show and be like, I'm my own guest. I need to find like a Nate lookalike. There is another Nate Shepard in Rhinelander. I could have him be my...
I think there's an NBA player, Nate Shepard.
Basketball player.
He's
and
taller
there actually is I'm sure he is. There actually is a wedding videographer in like Colorado who's also named Nate Shepard. So apparently I don't have the corner on that name, which is, I have a cousin named Nathan Shepard, for crying out loud. So never had the corner on that name.
I know there's some other Jeff Eatons. One is a Australian astronomer. Right. Another one I think is was it Kentucky or Tennessee Baptist minister?
But that where you got because your radio handle is the Rev.
The Rev, I know. And then there's a guy who plays in, I'm trying to remember the name of the band. They're from Kansas. But I was surprised because I was on my radio show preparations. I'd pulled the CD and said, that sounds like an interesting band. And then I looked at the notes inside, and there it was on bass, like gas, if you know what a homemade gas tank bass. You've heard of like cigar box guitars? Think of taking taking the gas tank from something and turning it and putting a neck on it and stuff. And
oh man, we should do an episode just dedicated.
I can't remember the name of the band though. Off the top of my head. You
learned something new. Jaron Child's chiming in with the heart emoji.
Hey there, Jaron.
Thanks for tuning in, Jaron. Yeah, keep the comments coming. If you have comments about stuff that we're discussing and some of the poems, that's lovely as well. And of course, the people in our live audience are always welcome to chime in. Or throw tomatoes, I guess. I don't know if we have tomatoes, but if for some reason you really don't like something that Jeff says, throw them at him. I cannot be responsible for anything. I know we are. I already
bound to say something that offends.
I already know, based on a little bit of what I've seen, that there's a mildly obscene aspect to tonight's show. So viewer discretion is advised. It's not that bad, and you probably won't even be able to tell on camera, but it is amusing.
Because you can't zoom in the camera, so.
Yeah, well, we set it up actually where you can. That's what we're doing.
Yeah, but that's not zooming in.
Not zooming in. Yeah. All right. This is enough chit chat.
Yeah, enough chit chat. Let me get my fancy drink glass out of the way.
Let me know if the sound. I'm seeing it clipping a little bit, so I'm hoping that it's still at a good level. So yeah, just let me know.
And if I mumble.
And if we mumble, yeah, we were both kind of mumbling beforehand, so try to speak up a little bit. But what do you have for us this evening?
Well,
Jeff?
and it's funny because the last time I was here was February, and it would seem appropriate that I would have done love poems then. Yeah. But I actually had some with me, but we got going with just poetry and never got to the love poems. And I mentioned to Nate, I said, well, I guess I'm going to have to come back to do the love poems. So we should have done those first near Valentine's Day. But it's National Poetry Month, so the timing's still good to do another poetry show, and we'll just talk about love poems in general, although several of the examples that I brought are Valentine's poems. Done by me for my late wife, or I'm not sure if any of hers are Valentine's poems. One's a response to one of my Valentine's poems. But as Nate said, sometimes people think of roses are red, kind of thing when they hear love poems. The problem I have with the concept of love poems is they generally don't show much about love.
That's a good quote. I don't know what it means yet, but I'm here.
Well, they show, what would I say, sentiment, but of such a vague nature that does it really say that you have deep feelings for that person? And somewhere in here, in my folder I pulled it off the wall. I'm not sure where I got it, but I had, unless it fell into the bag. Ah, there it is. This postcard, the author, I think, according to this, it says copyright 1976, Franklin Greenwald. This is so good, though, for poetry. Distributed by Quantity Postcards. Not quality.
Quantity. And
but
you only have one of them, so there's an irony in there.
I don't know where it came from, how it came into my possession anymore. But I think it comes down to explaining my feeling about love poems. It says, if I can be me with you, and you can be you with me, that is acceptance. And the mutual acceptance of each other's individuality is love in action. So to me, a true love poem doesn't ever have to say the word love. It may or may not show up in poems that I've got tonight or variations on it. I would tell my writing students, I don't want to see any four-letter words in your writing, you know, like love, soul, hate, none of that. I want real stuff. Because those are just vague. And I think I mentioned last show the same issue, saying, you know, I can say, I love pizza, I love my dog, and I love my wife, and my wife does not really want me to think that I mean this exact same feeling with the other two.
Right.
Which means that it's a dangerous thing to throw around. And I think anybody who's dealt with relationships knows that the moment that you say the word and you go, do I really tell her, kind of thing. Some people don't hesitate, and maybe they should, because they say, I love you, and what do they really mean? And does the other person have any idea what you mean? They hear it, and it means something in their head based on their experience, or what their own wants and desires are. I want to hear someone say that to me. But that's, when they hear it, they hear what they want to hear. And that may not be what you mean. So I think it's dangerous. Whereas recognizing that other person as the person that they are, and showing when you do something for them that you recognize who they are, that's where you demonstrate that your love for them. And it doesn't have to be a poem. That was the other thing I was thinking about. Okay, we're going to talk about love poetry, but you say, I'm not a writer, I'm not a poet, and that's cool. But maybe you know how to cook. Maybe you know how to paint. Maybe you know how to garden. Maybe you know, who knows what your talent or skill is. Everybody's got some, whether they acknowledge it or not.
Right.
And I know one of the things that I used to do, and since Mary passed away, my gardening has gone to hell. I just do not put the effort in. It was very difficult just to face dealing with it these last years. And then COVID came, and you'd think, I have all the time in the world. And I tore out the front garden, actually, and made it into just a patio. But I just came across pictures last night when I was looking for this one poem on an old computer. And I thought, my goodness, that garden looks beautiful. And then it reminded me, well, I worked hard on that garden because it made Mary happy. She loved that garden. She loved sitting in it. And so I devoted a lot to making it you know, something that she could enjoy. Not that I didn't enjoy it too, or other people,
right.
but the fact that her response to it, and I knew what she liked, and so I gifted, in a sense, that.
It's funny that you're saying all that, because shameless plug, but literally the podcast episode we just did on gift economy is like all of what you're describing there, of like talking about how, you know, again, we live in more of a capitalist society where everything is a one-to-one correlation. And so sometimes even gift giving can be sort of this like exchange, we call it a gift exchange, where it's sort of like, well, I did this for you, now you do this for me. And that's not really love, right? That's not a true commitment to the person. And something we had discussed was, you know.
Yeah, I didn't expect Mary to like do something for me in return for that.
Or,
I just wanted her to be
so
happy
like something
and enjoy
in kind, because I think sometimes, like what you were saying, like I was just thinking, I you know, sometimes people might be inclined to say, I love you, almost to like, do you love me too? Like to almost get back the, you know, sometimes we show
truth or dare,
a selfish kind of love, of like, I'm doing for you what I want you to do for me. And what you're describing is you don't want her to garden for you. You are gardening for her. And there's this like beauty of like knowing and seeing the person that's expressed when there's that tangibility of, I know that you like this, and I'm not doing this to like get something out of you, but just out of an expression of love. A very weird example, because it's really unusual, but I think is a perfect sort of tie into that. My brother actually just texted me today because he had listened to the podcast, and then he was like, I had actually created for him, he made a movie last year, his kind of first feature-length movie. It was just almost like a podcast with his friend talking about depression that turned into a very strange puppet show. And it was just, it feels like it'd be up your alley as far as like just strange.
I've always wanted to do a puppet show.
Actually, the name of the film is Debating Poetry, which is just an interesting, he has a quote that I think he might have come up with, that debating poetry is the only debate worth having. I don't know what it means, but...
I do.
All right, there you go. But I took the film and I put it on VHS, and I made a custom VHS box for it and gave it to him for his birthday. And I spent way more time than a person should on something like this. Why? Because I love him, and I knew that this is something that would be very specific, that he's the only person in the world who's going to appreciate this gift, and there's only one, you know, it's one of a kind. And he just texted and was like, that's what you guys were talking about on the podcast, so like the gift economy and this sort of idea that we don't, we're not building our love off of exchange or off of expectation, but actually off of like seeing and knowing each other, and just wanting to bless or to kind of add to the other person's life out of love for them.
I mean, Mary never said, why don't you do this in the garden? Or what about this, you know? Or why'd you put that there? Move that over that way, or whatever. There was never something like that. Whatever I was doing was what I was doing. But I had, and it's one of those things, if you're going to do an expression of love to a person, and it's based on who they are, then it's a reflection of your unique relationship.
Yeah.
And our relationship was pretty extraordinary in the way it developed and the way it just continued over the years. And, you know, to her saying, well, I'm a poet. I write poetry. What do you do? I write poetry. That was like, oh, poetry. I don't really get along with poetry. So it was like, well, when poets find out that you don't like, she didn't say she didn't like poetry. She'd had a bad experience with the poetry class. But in a sense, it laid out a challenge that I guess if I'm a poet, I'm going to have to kind of win her over with poetry. In other words, change her mind about poetry.
Right.
It's like, you know, you want someone that has less chance at fame and fortune than a small town musician.
I got you covered.
I got you covered, because I won't make a dime off of this, you know. But Thus, I became a teacher.
Yeah.
But no, it was just interesting because I did expose her to poetry, and as she always said, she said, I didn't need to go to grad school to become a poet like Jeff, because I went to grad school with Jeff. And so I think I read a poem last time. I can't recall whether I read any of the bed poems, but I wrote these poems and I was bringing them into my workshops, my poetry writing classes in grad school. And by the time the third one got done, which I'll read again, I was being asked by these women in class, and all of us were like, had already been out in careers, except for a couple younger students. Most of us were like divorced, had been in careers, burned out, coming back to do a creative writing program to try to just find our way. And they were coming up and saying, when are you going to introduce us to Mary? Because after these poems, we want to meet her. But that, and I told her that, and she laughed, and I think now that, but that says something, because she's an individual enough to them that they want to know more about her. That I'm writing about her in this way. And also I know part of it was no one had ever written about them that way. Which, you know, there's a lot of baggage among early middle-aged people in grad school.
That's a statement.
Maybe early middle-aged people.
So I'll read the third one again. And again, I think I did read these last time, but it's called Reading in Bed. And so this would have been from first year in grad school, and then we'll go to the first Valentine poem. But it's called Reading in Bed. Breast pulse traces jawline this warm March night as I rest my face upon your swells of breath. Your arm circles my head, hands heal settling on cheek so fingers can amble over ear and through hair. Melancholy dims your reading light, but you still punctuate the story with kisses on my scalp. Tears rise silently, your worries spring run off. Snow melt seeps into frost-heaved ground as you gather me into you.
I don't remember that you read
Yeah,
that.
I couldn't
you did
remember.
that with the art strike thing, I think.
Yeah, that may have been.
I recognize it.
And of course, one of the issues, if you get involved with a poet who's serious about it, if you get involved with a comedian, you're going to be in the act, right? If you get involved with a poet, you're going to be in the poems at some point, in some way.
Word to the wise.
And so this is pretty direct expression of a pretty intimate, tactile experience that to me was also trying to capture that profound nature of connection. Completely wordless. Where you just feel the relationship you're with that person deepening.
And it's not based on, I love it when you do this, and it's so nice, and you look so pretty, and it's not based on like the way the person looks or what they do for you. It's just like the beauty of presence, almost. Like that
that is about presence and being present for the other person, and sometimes knowing not to say anything either. That it's more important to just be there.
Yeah. The person you're truly in love with is someone you can be silent with. Like there's not a need to fill space necessarily.
So I started grad school in the fall of 1990. And what we'll go to is the first Valentine poem I ever wrote for. Mary, and the fact that...
Should we zoom in on this?
Sure. And I was telling Nate about the second place ribbon here. A contest was announced, and I can't remember if it was at the library in Marquette. Someplace said we're going to have we want people to enter Valentines they make. And we'll have a, little show of Valentines. So must have given them enough time that I could set it up. And then, of course, so it's not like it was a surprise that she was getting this, because it was one of those, I think even by this point, which was a year into our relationship, we'd already started working on various little projects together. I mean, I was writing for her magazine. I was in grad school. We were doing stuff. And we had a variety of projects that we did together. It was collaboration. But also we were talking about the idea of the muse. And Mary was certainly my muse, remains my muse. It's changed what has come out of it. But, so I was thinking, and of course, like you're saying, weird stuff. So this is not a roses are red, violets are blue. But I was thinking about that whole thing, Valentines and hearts. And I can't recall. I assume I wrote the poem first and thought, how am I going to present this? And so I thought, heart. Let's get literal about this. So it's set up as a medical folder. And it's got a case number and a date, name, my name, next of kin, Mary Kinnanen, relationship, Valentine. And when you open it, it is a torso that has had open heart surgery. And you can see it's got little stitches going down, because if you know, with open heart surgery, they literally crack your sternum and spread you open.
Didn't need to know that.
Didn't need to know that.
Yeah, thank you.
So the body opens up to reveal a crude cutout of an actual heart, not a typical.
Right.
And it's the poem, At the Heart of the Matter. And it reads, in the post-mortem, well, I'm going to have to actually pick this up.
That's all right.
Okay.
We got a good
and then we'll get back to it.
So.
In the post-mortem, sternum split and ribs spread wide, scar tissue obscured initials carved in walls of muscled chambers. But none were yours, as the coroner testified. The only evidence you had been there were light fingerprints, marks of a gentle hand that held but did not squeeze. And it got second place.
And I got second place.
Which was a joke with us. That cracked her up as much as anything, because we have a history now, that made history that she and I had both been in contests where we came in second. So, but it's a red ribbon, so.
And do we point to the fact that there's an anatomical
It's correct. Anatomically
it's
correct.
Anatomically correct.
But,
see the,
right,
that's enough of that.
That's enough of that. But again, so this is a year in. We'd moved in right as I started together. I moved in with her right as started grad school in the fall of 1990. So, it's still a very new relationship. But I'd never experienced anything where the depth of the relationship had grown so quickly. I mean, and you've heard the songs I've written, which has been kind of my way of dealing with things, more so than writing poems after her death. And one of them is about that first year. It's called Give and Take. And it's about that taking a deep breath and just plunging into something because it just seems like this is right. So what the heck? And I mean, literally the chorus references, I mean, in many of the lines in it come from real conversations. But the chorus starts out, I believe I'm starting to fall in love with you. And the response from her in the song is her response when I've said that to her. And she says, you don't know what you're getting into. She didn't say no, that's bad.
Right.
Because, of course, it's that horrible moment, like, this could ruin everything. Both two divorced people thinking about, all this. And I was just scared to death. But it also was that moment where I just knew I had to say something. I just had to. But that was her response. You don't know what you're getting into. And in the song I say, I don't care. But, at, what was I, 38? And this was like, I'd gotten this shot of youth, rejuvenation. But it wasn't like teenage. It was different. It was different. But I mean, it quickly expanded and it became this depth that kept getting deeper and deeper. And when I started grad school, it seemed, and I wrote about some other things as well, but very much so that there were regular poems regarding Mary, or I began to write things for her because she was one helping me have the opportunity to go to grad school and an opportunity to, in a sense, become more of who I thought I was, which again is that part about letting you be yourself. It was okay to say I write poetry, which is not always that acceptable.
It's not only okay, it's actually good.
So I suppose, so the next thing was writing my thesis, and I've read a couple things from it, but the one thing that is the closest to a love poem, and it's funny because when we got married, we didn't use my marriage ceremony that I wrote. Not that we couldn't have, we thought about it, but we actually just created a whole nother one. But it's called Rite of Matrimony. And so it's a ritualized form of course, what is marriage about? It's an expression of love, hopefully, that the two people make in whether it's a civil or a religious ceremony. Although, if you want to look at it in a capitalist transactional format, it's a socioeconomic restructuring, right? You bring your...
It's the most romantic thing.
You bring your resources into a relationship, so, and there's always that anyway, I'd moved in with Mary, I didn't have to pay rent, I brought my grad school stipend along, and that kind of stuff. We pooled our resources, but it was in support of something more than just that. But, so, this is a little longer, and again, there may come a time where I've talked with at least one person about doing a performance piece of these rituals at Art Start or something with multiple people. But Rite of Matrimony. Drape a bed in layers of blankets and quilts, a layer to caress, a layer to warm, a layer to beautify. It is a bed with both ends the same. No head, no foot, a simple bench of comfort from any angle. Place 2 pillows in the center, one of down, the other of hair. Upon each pillow set a crisp pastry filled with honey. Under each pillow hide a golden ring. Into a circle of family and friends, the couple carries the bed that will bear the weight of their union. Bride and groom kneel to either side and place a hand upon each pillow, touching fingers, meeting eyes. Minister. We are here to join two persons as they crack their bones and suck from each other a sweet marrow. The couple break open the pastries. Each offers honey to the other. They breathe into each other the sighs of desire. The couple leans over the bed to kiss. But there is more than breath to fill these lives. The minister now draws from a hem a needle, long for stitching thick cloth, and lays it on the hair pillow. Minister. Take a sturdy needle and prick the ring finger of your new spouse. See that the answer to pain is a welling of love, bright as fresh blood. With bloody fingers to each other's lips, soothe the hurt with laughing tongue. Taste the salt of love, not just the sweet. The minister now draws from a sleeve a silk scarf and lays it across the down pillow. Minister. Upon this silk place your joined left hands, and with your right hands tie a loose knot to bind your clasp. This is the friendship of lovers, cooperation in a delicate task, a link easily broken should either turn away. A pleasure become pain should the knot tighten. The congregation now joins hands and begins a slow clockwise walk. Once around, the couple unties the scarf and spreads it over the pillows, from underneath which they bring forth the rings. Minister. As we circle this couple, they slip rings on left third fingers, then palm to palm, eye to eye, they pledge their union, couple to each other. What I have seen, you remember. What I have written, you recite. What I have been, you become. Minister. Who are these people kneeling before us? Congregation. Husband and wife, wife and husband, one breath, one blood, one life. Minister. Then let husband and wife know the comforts of their union. Bride and groom recline upon the marriage bed, which their guests then carry from the wedding site.
Where do you get some of the, because obviously you're taking familiar imagery, but then you're throwing a lot of, does your brain just work that way? Or were you given tools, or how do you come up with some of those new comparisons and ideas and images in such a familiar environment?
The whole thesis is, again, represents a secular form of ritual.
Right.
It's a new order of worship, it's called, based on the Methodist worship structure. So there's sort of that bedrock of understanding that ritual.
Right.
That and the fact that it needs to be expressed in a way.
Symbols and
actions. But it's really hard to say where I came from some of that, came up with some of that, other than I'm trying to think about the intimacy, the declaration of intimacy, and how do you demonstrate intimacy of that type. And I suppose at some point I thought, it's like you'd have to be like vampires. Or you'd have to literally crack open to the marrow. How do you get to the marrow of another person? And so what would be a symbolic way of saying I will go that far.
Right.
which is why I think the greatest love song I've heard in the last, I don't know, decades is Jason Isbell's song that he sings with his wife called If We Were Vampires. Because it's about the fact that if they were vampires, they wouldn't have to worry because they would be together forever. But they're not. And as the lyrics say much more artfully than I'm explaining it, one of them's going to die first. And that means one of them will be left alone. And of course, for me, I've lived that.
Right.
And when he sings it in a, it's not pandering. It's not saying, woe is me. It's just an honest expression of, this will be the hardest part of our loving each other.
Telling the truth, yeah.
And, but if you recognize that, then it makes what you have more meaningful.
Yeah, there's almost a deeper beauty when you embrace reality than when you try to build
because what we
almost
have
this fake version of your relationship to avoid facing the truth of either that it ends, or I think even just that, you know, sort of the Mary saying you don't know what you're getting into. It's like that's the reality of any relationship, and I think sometimes, especially with romantic relationships, maybe, I don't know if it was different, you know, when you were growing up, but certainly for my generation, it was like we're just oversaturated in sort of this very oversimplified understanding of romance to where it sets you up for failure when you go into a lot of relationships and like, oh, you've got flaws? Oh, you're not, oh, I've got flaws? You know, and so I think it can be a lot more disorienting for a lot of people if you are unwilling to navigate those things. But I think there is this deeper beauty of like being known on that level and being seen where, and of course it's scary because you don't know. You know, I actually wrote a song around the time when we were first married or engaged that was of a similar type called Infinite Embrace, where it was sort of this like, I think this, if we jump into this, we're going to die, and let's do it anyway. You know, this is going to be a whole different thing that's going to, I don't know, but I can't not.
Yeah.
Sort of there's a greater, I forget the lyrics off the top of my head, but it's dangerous dancing on the edge of infinite embrace. It's wearisome to think of all the trouble that we share, but it's worse considering the loss if someone else danced in our place and how we never would have known each other there. So it's sort of that, yeah, like, of course it's dangerous and messy, but like, it's not love if it's not those things. And so it may as well face the music now, face the truth, but there's actually a deeper beauty that can be had in that relationship when you are known and you know your partner that way.
And it'll come up in a poem Mary wrote about, I have an issue with getting frustrated easily by not everything, but certain things. If I start getting frustrated at them, it just, I'm sure I'm a pain. I mean, I know I was a pain. And of course, your most intimate person in your life is the one that's going to feel that reverberation of your frustration. And whether you think you're snapping when you say something, or that what you said was, you think is benign, but maybe isn't, but you can't hear it because you're just kind of, now I'm trying to remember where I was going. But I said to her on a couple occasions, because we didn't have dust-ups too often. I mean, really, over 26 years together, if a couple times a year things came to a head over something, and it was usually because one of us was being stubborn. Stubbornness is one of the worst things to deal with in a marriage, because, you know, and there's that part, can you still accept that person when they're being a pain in the ass? You know, when they're not letting you have your way or whatever it is. And I, on a couple occasions, said, I just want you to know that no matter how upset I am right now, it has not in any way reduced the love I have for you. You know, it's two separate things. That even in the face of that, the one thing I could always count on, and that I could look inside and say, but I still love her to death. And you know, it's because I would sometimes think, you know, I'm so upset, and yet it's not changing anything about how I feel, other than my frustration with this thing that I can't get you know, taken care of.
Wow.
And that's when you start feeling that is when you know it's different. Because it's too easy to get upset. Well, if you're going to be that way, I don't want to be around you. And just walk away. Well, I had no intention of walking away.
Yeah.
So here's another. And so on Valentine's Day, and then we got married on leap year, so every 4 years sometime of what I was able to find, I would write a poem as well for our quadrennial. But this is a Valentine that was, again, based on an experience that Mary smoked when I met her. Smoked Camel Straights. She didn't smoke all the time. She used to smoke a bit, but then she'd stopped, and I encouraged her to not smoke. But for whatever reason, we moved to Rhinelander, and Book World used to have a cigar room.
Oh, yeah.
And we got in this habit, for whatever reason. I can't remember what the event was, and she said, I just feel like smoking a cigar to celebrate this. So anyway, we started every so often picking up a cigar. And I never smoked. So, and not that I'd ever even think of inhaling a cigar, but it became more of like a sacred cigar, like tobacco. But also just a symbolic thing. So I ended up writing, I was thinking about this, you're saying, what makes me think of these things? Well, yeah, I have a weird head, you know. And I started thinking about this idea that on Valentine's Day, we had been buying these cigars and smoking them, not cheap ones, not horribly expensive, but not the real crap things. So this poem is called On Their Day, Lovers Smoke Expensive Cigars. Uprooted, hanging around while age draws off that shallow green, then ripped and rolled to a satin thickness that repays the caressing hand, their aromas can only hint of a taste enveloped until each full body meets its match. Two saints, two Valentines, Valentinos, served up on the gold platter of an after-dinner Rome, found themselves releasing their soulful smoke and leaving their pious ashes this day. But they didn't want to endure another Saturnalia anyway, preferring to meet their maker more than their match, not being lovers, at least of each other, so far as I know. Lovers' tongues search for an essence, a taste of the bittersweet elements that are both fused and freed by a close heat, each wrapped in a leaf pressed smooth by the other, each waiting to burn.
I feel like there's a fair amount, at least in your poetry, that seems to be sort of this. I mean, obviously that's a physical activity that you would do with her. So there's that aspect of just the communal experience, but you're really good at like drawing out the physical components of the thing itself, but highlighting the aspects that then are like, are you talking about the cigar or are you talking about the lovers? And so there's almost, at least that's what I'm getting out of it.
And of course it's both.
It's both, but that's where I think there's this beauty of like the combining those two ideas that draws out this deeper expression of love than just simply he loved her and they cuddled, you know, like.
And afterwards they smoked a cigar.
And afterwards they smoked a cigar, you know. I also think of the.
But I mean, and it's one of those things where, it just, whatever my train of thought. And I was looking at those cigars and thinking about them and thinking about tobacco, which is a very symbolic plant, and is such a complicated plant. You know, love is complicated, smoking is complicated. The Roman Empire was extremely complicated. And the fact that when I'd looked up something about St. Valentine and found out there were actually two. That's why it says it. Two Valentines. At least historically, both of them were burned at the stake in Rome.
Oh, wow, there's like so many extra layers.
And so as soon as I see these things,
Right.
I mean, things that are historical or scientific and stuff just intrigue me as to how that, like you're saying, the physical, the reality of these things plays into our reality today. You know, again, yeah, you can get a Hallmark card that says, hey, Happy Valentine's. Yeah, let's celebrate those Romans burning a guy at the stake. Woohoo! Chocolate?
Yeah, I know.
So.
Yeah, there's a sort of related of just the, you know, you could have a Hallmark card, or you could have a poem, you know, written in that way. Norma had commented that she wants you to compose all the write-ups of her and her work from now on. So I was like, oh, that could be like a whole side business.
Oh, God.
Can you write me, instead of a traditional biography, just a poem? You know, here's a summation of my work in a poem format, and you'll walk away even more confused and in love with the universe than you did when you started. You know?
So I see that this one also has, and again, I'm looking at this next one. It was written when we were here, and it harkens back a bit to the marriage ceremony when I hadn't really thought about that, because once you're done with your thesis, and that's a performance thing, and you don't have like a tour of shows, which you never do as a grad student. You give your reading, which is a much better oral. You know, if your grad oral exam, well, for a writing master's degree, I had to read my poetry in front of people. And that's a lot better than being quizzed by professors. Just a word up.
Yeah, another word to the wise. If you don't want to be quizzed in your master's thesis, go for poetry.
At the right school, at least. Anyway. So in 2000, this was written for our quadrennial, which would have been 8 years. So our second quadrennial. First would have been in 96 and then in 2000. So having been married 8 years. And it's called Lingua Franca, which is
a common language between people groups if they don't share.
Yeah, language. Sort of like language of commerce.
Yeah.
You know, like English is the lingua franca of modern society because
most people,
you know.
It's the majority language that can be spoken. Yeah.
So think of this as talking about two people having to develop a common language. At first, our banter traded provincial patois, rusticisms, and opaque idioms. Then we paired patter and prattle to guttural pidgin. Our tongues glossed meaning and means, seeking purchase on slick syllables and each other. Our lips traced forms for sour, sweet, salt, infusing murmurs with vinegar, syrup, and brine. Our teeth incised accents, biting consonants, pricking consciences, drawing blood and analogies. Our halting breaths filled vowels and vows, pillowing heads and haunches, muffling a slurry of sobs and sighs. A 4-year course of study, repeated for advanced standing, has brought a measure of fluency. But I still want to learn all your words for love.
I'm always a sucker for linguistic poems because I went to linguistic school for a semester. So.
And I realized too, when I said all of a sudden I noticed some things from that. What I seem to have done with this is I was referencing previous things I'd written for her and other poems I'd written over the course of our relationship, because from those early bed poems from grad school to the marriage ceremony and other things show up in this.
I love that.
But we both loved language. I mean, one of her favorite keepsake books was her dictionary from elementary school. And I mean, again, it was one of those things. I like dictionaries too. To find another person that can sit and read a dictionary because it's interesting.
Right. Actually interesting, not, yeah.
Yeah.
That's funny. I love that.
So.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's one of those things. It was one of those things where we thought, well, we're going to China and they seem a little antsy. They aren't saying it exactly, but they're sort of hinting at, are you guys married or not? Because our last names were different.
Yeah.
And to get our visas and be in the same housing unit. And we'd talked about, well, we never want to get married again. Everything's fine. And then we started saying, oh, this is going to be a problem, blah, blah, blah. And then we started joking about it. Well, we could always just get married. Ha, ha, ha. And then one day I said, hey, leap year this is coming up.
Yeah.
I said, if we got married on leap year, we'd only have to remember it once every 4 years. And next thing you know, we were planning a wedding for leap day. So, which is why we had quadrennials, which added a certain heightened element to that, this different type of cycle. Right. It wasn't just the average anniversary kind of thing. So it brought, something. But she still referred at the 28th to March 1st as the nanosecond, because, of course, the scientific fact that there's, to adjust to the things that it's going to add up to the extra day every 4 years, the way that scientifically they're measuring things, there's always a little time at the atomic level between March 28th and or February 28th and March 1st. So she'd refer to it as the nanosecond. She'd roll over in bed and kiss me on the cheek and say, happy nanosecond, roll over the other way.
That's great.
So you've heard from me. So this is one Mary wrote in response to me, and it was written when she was mayor. So back around 2000, 2001. And I don't remember if it was for Valentine's Day or what. Let's see the other one. Well, she could have written it around that same time, but I think it was probably maybe the next year as lingua franca. But it's because I would always say, Christmas time, Valentine's, whatever, and she says, well, I always write a poem or try to write a poem for you. You could always write a poem for me. I don't want anything else. That'd be nice. And, and she just, her approach to poetry was very different than mine. But sometimes she did. So this is called, and she is very, if I'm journalistic and very much like physical details and stuff, she is extremely just pragmatically observational. And her, to my husband, who sits in the back of the chambers mouthing something I can't make out from the podium, who drives a van with a bumper sticker decrying mineral extraction and water, who stands in front of the class intoning, think, who calls his daughter but gets her mother, who calls his mother but gets his father, which is actually perhaps more enjoyable. To my husband who feeds me well, who keeps a roof over my head and our bed an exciting place between periods and sleep. To my husband who is easily frustrated, but also quick with a joke or sarcastic remark, which makes people think and me squirt substances out my nose. To my husband who didn't want the cat or dog, but is now their rubbing pole. To my husband, thank you.
Yeah, I feel like that's a great example of some of what you've been talking about too, just the specificity. Like obviously that's enjoyable for us to listen to in some sense, but it's almost more so just like the way that she sees you and the sort of familiarity between the two of you. It's just a more concrete exploration of love than most love poems would be.
And honestly, you don't have to be a poet to write. It doesn't have to be a love poem. A love message that acknowledges the particulars of that person and the fact that you're paying attention.
Right.
And maybe that's one of the most important expressions of love. Pay attention.
Yeah. See them. See each other.
So here's the other one that I don't know whether you're going to be able to see it.
I think it'll be okay on the camera there. We didn't pass this one around the audience in case you wanted to get a closer look. do you want it? And we'll pass this one around too if you want to get a closer look, because
this is for Valentine's Day 2001. And again,
Josh is laughing at the anatomical correctness, I'm assuming.
I didn't notice it.
You didn't know what we were talking about.
And I still do not know, again, I couldn't explain to you now how I came up with writing this. But sometimes, again, this is a language poem again. Roget's Valentine Menagerie. I'll put it up here. And let me set this other stuff down.
The honors, if you want to read it.
So, as you can imagine, Roget's thesaurus has synonyms as well as antonyms, and in this case, we're dealing with homonyms. But
these are hard to navigate. Do I have
yeah.
the page here? All right, is that the right first page?
Okay, so they're numbered. Roget's Valentine Menagerie for Mary 21401. Heart. Heart. Stag. Staggers. My heart staggers at every sight of you. You. Sheep. Sheepish. You love me even when I'm sheepish and a stunning bore. 3. Bore. Pig. Piggish. Your loving eyes bore through my piggish ways and strip me bare.
Sorry.
4. Bear. Grizzly. Grizzled. Bare I stand, grizzled and voicing my love till hoarse. 5. Horse. Mare. Married. Horse, I whisper, when we married, I gave you my heart. Editor's note, C1.
Do you get it? Because it goes in a cycle.
So.
Love it. Roget's, how do you say that?
Roget's Valentine Menagerie. And of course, the homonyms. But it's also, and again, would this work for everybody as a Valentine? But if you know your partner, and their love of language and playing with that and trying to create something that is just not, again, a greeting card sentiment. It's just, again, trying to gift them with something you're good at.
Right.
Not expecting, again, although, again, since she's a writer and started writing poetry, then I was like, you could write me a poem too. Because it would mean a lot to me.
Right.
That and she'd roll her eyes, and because she didn't write poetry with the same impetus that I would have for writing poetry.
Yeah.
I mean, she's a great poet, and I still, every so often, I've been finding poems of hers that have stuck somewhere in a folder or something that I have no idea when she wrote them or what situation she was in when she started writing it. But they're very much her and her way her mind worked and expressed herself. And so I couldn't really expect her to toss off something just because I really want you to, kind of thing. So in this case, though, she did. Response to Roget's Valentine Menagerie. Your thesaurus words are lovely, tear-streaked stain raining down. On the original of this, which I've somehow misplaced, something got spilled on it after I gave it to her, and left this like bleed in the pink.
Yeah.
And so she refers to it. Tear-streaked stain running down its face, the animals a menagerie. Remember the birds singing as we lay in that soft bed, awakening us to our happy exhaustion, full into ourselves, hearing the other, laughing as the sun showed up just after we'd figured out the birds. Happy then and now that we've eased full into what we've become, are you still? Or is there a better word for it? You old stunning bore, love the chick.
Wow. Yeah. I love the internal, I don't know what you want to call it, the universe. I love the idea of these poems, like referring to each other in a way that was another aspect of the conversation that I had with my friend on the podcast, was just like, making art for each other, like making art. Well, and that's some of the, with the Nate show, is like, who's this for if it doesn't live forever on the internet? It's for us then, right? Yeah. It doesn't have to have this sort of eternal quality. And then by being that concrete and specific, it actually does have eternal quality.
And in prepping for this and talking about doing this, we had talked about the idea of the muse. And I'd never had an understanding of that. I mean, I knew the term and the concept.
Yeah.
And it was like, well, apparently if sometimes people do, painters have someone that just, they paint over and over again. It inspires them to paint or whatever. Although art history, it always seems to turn out poorly. Right? Someone's killed in a garret in Paris or something, or cuts off their own ear, which I'm not going to do for anybody. But all of a sudden, and it answered that question, because sometimes I'd say, I know how to write poems. I know how to do this and that. But who am I doing it for? Why am I doing it? Okay, journalism, you're doing it for a paying audience. Right. You have a purpose that you think is important, but, it's a job, and you're doing it for that specific audience. But a poem, especially if you've never encountered someone that responds particularly enthusiastically to it, or it felt kind of odd, you know. I mean, you'd write poems and then it'd be for class, but then it would just sit there in a folder or something. And suddenly, as our relationship was developing, I realized I had someone. And I didn't care, and you know, because people say, well, have you published a bunch of poems? And I said, well, Mary's published more than me because it's work to get things published, and she would work at it. And it really didn't matter that much to me. You know, if I wrote a poem and Mary enjoyed it, then cool, that was enough. You know, and beyond that, it's all gravy. But, you know, all of a sudden I had this person that if I wrote something, I knew there was this person that would appreciate what I'd done, even if it wasn't about her.
Right. Yeah.
You know, she saw it as a worthwhile activity once she kind of got a grip on what poetry was all about. When we met, that wasn't the case. That poetry did not have much meaning to her, and then she fell into it, and then took off with it. But so there was that, and again, I've gotten through the grief of losing her by writing songs about us and about her and our relationship. Some of them are happy and exuberant. Most of them are rather not.
Yeah.
Although I have one that I purposely wrote it so that the chords were kind of bouncy, and yet it was talking, and it's called I'm in Love with a Dead Girl. You know, and it's sort of like, I don't know, is that an emo song? I'm in love with a dead girl, it's a complicated thing.
Yeah.
But we'd talked about this whole idea of, well, there's an arc to relationships, whether you want it or not. You know, there's the ones that just don't work out, and we'd both been there and gone through that. So we'd talked about all of that. We knew all of that, and that, you know, we didn't want to experience that kind of crap again. And I think we dedicate, I mean, that was, and it's mentioned in one of that song, In Love with a Dead Girl, about that our art was our relationship. You know, we may write poetry, we may do photography, but our real art was our love for each other and the relationship that we had become. We were always creating our relationship. If we did an art project together, it was because it grew out of that relationship. If I write a poem about her, it grew out of that relationship. The relationship was the art that we were dedicated to. So
a relationship is the art that you were dedicated to. That's another great quote.
So
good.
But again, she was very pragmatic about these, very, maybe it's just that Finnishness, that, you know, the stoic resignation to the hardships of life, even if things are going well. So in 2006, and again, you'll see how different her idea of a Valentine's poem is. But it is a love poem. It's just a very, what would you say, clear-eyed love poem. Richness together forever and ever. For Jeff on Valentine's Day 2006. This time of year, it's about the couples. This year, clueless honky man and salt and pepper black fart are beamed into millions of rooms. The S&P's wife nodding smugly at her partner's wise observations, while across the room, hapless honky girlfriend realizes she's engaged to a nitwit. But what the hell, dummy or smarty, they're hitched or hot for something to hitch themselves up to. Something with staying power. Ah, the hitching. How romantic. Everyone knows that. But after the commercial ends and life fast forwards, who will be the first to go? The others sitting silent at the service. And after that, in the long afternoons alone in the house, waiting for what we cannot yet know. Putting a gun to the head or a pot of water to boil are only two of an infinite number of options. The one with co-workers will receive attempts of comfort, words over a cup of coffee and box of sweet stuff. Someone popping in the cubicle for a bow of the head and quick squeeze of the shoulder. Either way, the survivor will corrode in pain, then move on. That's all the dead one was hoping for, but all the dead one will do is lay in the dirt as his or her troubles are over. On a lighter forever and ever note, couples check out together all the time. Take cancer of the colon. Going out may be not in style, but at least together. Corroding together, messily and with a vengeance so horrible, only one can really know what the other one is experiencing. They're sharing a room, of course, sharing togetherness through it all. But there are no doubles in this building, not that they'd want one. And the nurse's aide has stubbed out their stick of incense, the incense one of their girls had smuggled in. This is a no-smoking campus. She'd lectured them in a spray of Lysol. Although it's only 2:29, it's already been a long afternoon. The couple, waiting for their latest x-rays, realize rationalization is dead, so they just bitch loudly and let the aide know what they think of her as she changes their sheets. First his, then hers.
I see what you mean. It's a very different approach to writing love Valentine's.
You know, and it's in that same vein of, you know, and that was, I know she told me that, I'm trying to remember whether she had read something about a couple that was dying together or had died, and some, you know, story about it, or whether, on the other hand, of course, she was really good about visiting her older relatives when they were in hospital and things like that. And she may have, in fact, been like next door to a dying couple and seen it. And then it's more reportage than we may realize. And clearly she'd seen a commercial, some Valentine's commercial of people giddy in love and acting stupid. And it's like,
the other side of that,
let's look at these, you know, there's this, and then there's this.
Right. Wow.
And of course, this is a decade before she died. And at that time, you know, we were both in seemingly fine health and everything, so it wasn't, everything was going good for us. I mean, really, we were just, like she said when in her own writing her own obituary, says, you know, we raised our kids, we paid our taxes, you know, we did what we were supposed to do. We had a good life, you know, this was what our life was, but it was together. You know, who else in their obituary refers to the fact that they paid their taxes on time? You know, but I mean, it was just that somebody that writes their own. I mean, it's that what matters? Does it matter that neither of us were famous or rich or anything? You know, we didn't hurt anybody. We did our part.
Right.
We raised good kids. You know.
What more could you ask for in the end? Yeah.
So when,
and just so you're aware, we're about 8 minutes to 10.
Okay.
So.
Well, I'll read these last couple then, because I think I've read on finding old letters in a drawer. Didn't I?
I don't.
Anyway,
some of my memory's blurring because I think I've heard you read some of these before.
So this is another call and response, I guess you'd say, because when we had to let everybody know that Mary was, had ALS, there's, that's the writing on the wall. There's no cure, there's no treatment, there's, and so we sat down and said we need to just send something out to our friends. We don't want to email. We'll telephone certain people. But we sent out a letter that basically, as Mary said at the end, she said, if you read Jeff's poem, you'll see that we're going to be okay. Mary had a math phobia. She skipped that on the SATs. She looked at the math section and just said, oh, hell no. And just got up and left and pretty much aced the verbal.
Right.
But anyway, so, and we'd always kid about that. So I wrote this as if it was it's called Elementary Arithmetic of Love. And it's structured as an elementary arithmetic book. And again, you got to know the person.
Right.
Because, nothing. So it says, Elementary Arithmetic of Love by Jeff Eaton, M.A. Parentheses, this book belongs to, and then it's got the dash like you'd have in front of a text, Mary Kay. No metaphors, just equations. Set 1. My arms equal your arms. My legs equal your legs. My heart equals your heart. Set 2. Your fears equal my fears. Your joys equal my joys. Your life equals my life. Story problems. 1. 2 lips press 2 lips. The situation is a variable, so call it X. Then 2 arms seek 2 arms. Call this operation O. Factor in PSI for X and O. The answer is 1. 2. 5 fingers twine with 5 fingers. Sometimes this happens in the dark. Sometimes it happens without looking. Sometimes it happens in public. Whatever, the digits will carry themselves. The answer is 1. This is her response. And it's funny because it goes all the way back to the start of our relationship. Spark, for Jeff from Mary, BA UM75 in 2015. Sparky was an old beagle who lived on 2nd Street next door to where we would live before Crazy China anyway. Spark, that's the word I'm looking for. New Year's Eve at 10 o'clock Charlie's, me in a booth with old A2 friend Paul. Laid over from Darmstadt to Elk River, Minnesota. Miserable with toothache, amusing ourselves with Casio watch. Figuring out them good old airport codes. When you walked by and sat down. Well, to be honest, I saw you looking good and confided to Paul about mysterious codes. Hey, ask him for answer. He's a newspaper editor and real smart. And Spark, Spark, Spark. Isn't that one Saudi Arabia? Spark, 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 like rubbing a couple sticks. Then 25 years ago in your cabin, Spark, Spark, Spark. A sparkgasm, spark tsunami, spark volcano, spark a boob. Anyway, now Sparky's long gone. Even Paul's dead and buried, while you and I remain somewhere along the continuum watching the campfire burn. How much time we got left?
3 minutes.
Okay.
And you do have one child saying slight correction, one good kid and one incorrigible one.
Well,
so says Ellie Jett.
Maybe. Well, I've read the other one before. It's my latest poem, but it's looking back again at finding some old letters. But I've read that a number of times, and I don't want to just crowd right up to the end. So.
Well, that's. I mean.
But if anybody's got
more,
any questions
fine.
too, or you've got any questions.
If there are any thoughts or questions, either on the chat or in the room, and maybe just have you close out the evening with the poem.
All right.
There's a few other people I did want to mention were saying hi in the chat. Connie Meyer says hi.
Hi, Connie.
And that she's
our sailing buddy.
Okay. And she's been fairly active in the chat, saying, "I'm trying not to cry. Ah, those Finn women. Her poems were great, as yours, of course."
So I'll try to read this one without crying myself. On finding old letters in a drawer. Who do I tell all the things I need to tell you? The things I never thought about until you. The things only needing saying to you. I read our old letters and they are so direct, the way we always wanted to speak with each other. They are intimate on every level, tending to arc from the mundane to the erotic. I was always haphazard about goals in life, well, until I met you. Then I had one drive, and that was to be with you. And by be with you, I meant make you happy, show you that you were safe with me and safe to be yourself with me, that you were who I wanted to be with, not a woman I wanted you to become for me, and that I was about us, that us was more important than me, which was something I couldn't put my finger on until I met you and was overwhelmed by the power of us. I never really understood the term muse until I wrote to you, for you, about you, because of you. Conversely, you note in a letter that I disrupted your dismissive notion of poets, perhaps my second greatest accomplishment after successfully wooing you. Or maybe that was the key to the wooing. I do know I needed no other audience for my words, which may be why others found them compelling at times. In one of the letters, I tell you how you are making me a better person because you are helping me see troubling ideas for what they are. Until then, I don't think that I had truly accepted that such discomfort could be embraced, but you were teaching me in the way of Mary, a way of frankness, kindness, boldness, joy, and finally, vulnerability, teaching me, daring me to be better to your last breath. The letters raise a couple questions that I'm sure we later discussed and answered, and kept answering better and more completely because they are not questions I remember being asked again. Like many longtime partners, these were things we just didn't need to spend time speaking of as our lives merged more completely, which in some ways is too bad, for the passion and caring in the letters is so fertile in its articulation. But I sit here now knowing the crop raised from that rich love, we harvested and harvested a bounty from that love, feasting and doing our best to never let our palates become dulled by our familiarity, but rather to wallow in the familiarity and let it cement the us we pledged to form, the true art we vowed to create. Unlike so many other plans that came and went, we stuck to that one, and damn if we didn't pull it off. Now I speak to you and wait for you, and sometimes can hear your response echo in me. I see your face in the darkness of the bed, and sometimes I am calmed, and sometimes, as tonight, I cannot sleep with the knowing you are not there. So, of course, you have me writing to you. 2:04 a.m., November 6, 2017.
Well, thank you for joining me again on the Nate Show. It's always a pleasure, and lots of love in the chat. I also wanted to mention Kathy Myers also saying hi.
Hi, Kathy.
Myers, rather. And let's see, Rick Savala said, enjoyed your readings, Jeff. And Jaron says thank you to you as well. So lots of love and comments. I'm sorry if I missed anybody's comment.
Well, it's nice to have old and new friends.
I know, it's
tuning
always
in.
fun to see. Michael Faust says, Jeff, the true love shows through. A wonderful feeling to have experienced. Nate, thank you for letting me visit your home. Yeah, this is part of what I love about doing it in the home is, I don't know, it's just a fun and enjoyable atmosphere to have these kinds of conversations with friends who, I don't know, it's like these are the conversations we often have anyway. But, it's just fun to be able to share some of these. You know, I've heard a fair amount of those poems before, and I enjoy them every time. So,
well, and again, I would just encourage other people. If you really love someone, it doesn't have to be a poem, but
it might have to be specific.
But it should be something that shows you know them.
Right.
And
if you can't think of anything, spend some time observing.
Yeah. And there's lots of different ways to show it.
And I think there's so many of these principles too that extend to other relationships. It's not just romantic partners, but children and family and friends.
Yeah.
And there's so many, like I said, my brother, you know, knowing that this specific gift would be exactly the only person in the world who's going to appreciate that. And I don't need anybody else to appreciate it in order for it to be valuable. And so I think there's a lot to consider on just giving and love and all that.
A friend, you know, sometimes a friend needs to know that you are a friend.
Yeah.
And
Pay attention. See each other.
Yeah.
So thank you. Yeah, thank you again to Jeff for
Thanks, Nate.
being my guest. Thank you to the live audience for being the live audience. Thank you to the
They're
online
still
audience
alive.
still being alive. And thank you to the online audience as well. In 2 weeks, I have Kai Mountjoy coming on, and he'll be plucking banjos and steel string guitars and whatever.
Got a variety of.
And apparently he wants to talk about the existence of aliens. That's what he told me. So we might be talking about
aliens and banjos.
So if aliens and banjos are your thing, 2 weeks from today, I believe he will be on. And then the final show for the season will be 2 weeks after that, and I haven't fully finalized what that's going to look like. But stay tuned if you're interested in following along with the show. My YouTube channel is probably the easiest and best way to stay in touch with that. So youtube.com/Nate Shepherd. That's about all I have. So I don't know if you have anything else to add before we sign off. But thanks, everybody. Have a good night, and we will see you next time on The Nate Show. All right. Bye now.